Have you noticed that when the room finally goes quiet, the silence doesn't actually feel empty anymore, but instead feels strangely heavy, almost like it has a weight of its own? Welcome. I'm glad you're here to sit with this thought for a moment. It's a feeling that seems to be growing more common as we move through 2025. A sense that the quiet moments aren't just an absence of sound, but a presence in themselves, something thick and undeniably loud. It's an interesting paradox to consider, that in a time when we have more control over our environment than ever before, the simple act of sitting in a quiet room can feel more intense than a crowded street. Many people are starting to wonder if silence itself has changed, if the quality of quiet has somehow shifted in the last few years. But there is a gentle curiosity loop worth opening here, because perhaps silence hasn't changed at all, but rather the world around silence has accelerated so much that stopping feels less like resting and more like crashing. When we talk about silence being loud, we aren't usually talking about decibels or acoustics, but rather the internal sensation that arises when the external inputs stop. In 2025, our baseline for stimulation is incredibly high, higher perhaps than it has ever been in human history, and we navigate a landscape that is perpetually awake, a stream of information and entertainment and connection that never actually pauses. Because of this constant hum, the sudden drop into silence can feel jarring, like stepping off a high-speed train onto a stationary platform, where the motion of the ride is still vibrating in your legs even though you are standing still. It is becoming a shared experience, this feeling that when the noise cuts out, the momentum of the digital world continues to rush forward in our minds, creating a kind of phantom noise, a mental reverberation that fills the quiet. This is often why silence feels so loud, not because it is aggressive, but because it stands in such stark contrast to everything else we experience during the day. Consider for a moment the average morning routine, where many of us wake up and almost instinctively reach for a device, inviting the world's noise in before we have even fully opened our eyes. It's a seamless transition from dreams to data, and throughout the day, that connection remains unbroken, with podcasts filling the commute, music filling the work hours, and videos filling the gaps in between. There is a texture to this constant audio and visual input, a comfort in it because it keeps us moving, keeps us engaged, and it keeps us feeling connected to a larger pulse. But this is the part many people don't expect, the realization that this comfort creates a dependency not on the content itself, but on the noise as a buffer. When that buffer is removed, even for a few minutes, we are left with a sudden, expansive space that can feel surprisingly vast and unmoored. It is in this space that people often notice a rising tension, a subtle urge to check, to scroll, to fill the void with something, anything, just to bring the volume of the world back up to a comfortable level. This isn't necessarily a fault or a failure, but rather a natural adaptation to an environment that rewards constant presence. We have trained ourselves to process information rapidly, to switch tasks instantly, and to be available perpetually. So when the demand for those skills vanishes in a moment of silence, the engine of our attention is still revving, looking for a road that is no longer there. It can feel like waiting for a pot to boil, or waiting for a friend who is late, that gentle hum of anticipation that never quite resolves. Some describe it as an itch, a feeling in the hands or the chest that suggests we should be doing something, that we are missing an unseen signal, or that the silence itself implies we have forgotten a task. This is where silence starts to feel different in 2025 than it might have felt a decade ago, because the silence is now laden with the potential for digital connection. In the past, if you were sitting alone in a room and it was quiet, you were simply alone. But now, even in a quiet room, The potential to be connected to millions of people is sitting right there in your pocket or on the table next to you. That potential energy creates a kind of noise, a silent frequency that asks for attention. Many people notice that it is harder to simply sit and stare out a window today because the alternative, the infinite library of the internet, is always within reach, making the act of doing nothing feel like an active decision to ignore the world. It creates a subtle pressure, a feeling that by sitting in silence, we are declining an invitation, or stepping out of a flow that everyone else is still swimming in. This is why the silence can feel judgmental or demanding, as if it is asking us why we aren't productive, why we aren't entertained, or why we aren't catching up on the things we missed. It is a heavy feeling, this sense that pause is a luxury we can't quite afford, or a waste of time that could be better spent. And yet, beneath this restless surface, there is another layer to why silence feels so loud, and it touches on something more internal, something that has less to do with phones and more to do with ourselves. When the external noise stops, the internal volume inevitably turns up, and for many, that internal voice has a lot to say. In a world that offers endless distraction, it is very easy to go days, weeks, or even months without truly hearing our own unedited thoughts, without sitting with our own unprocessed emotions, or without facing the questions that tend to bubble up only when the water is still. The noise of 2025 acts as a very effective lid on these deeper currents, keeping everything moving fast enough that we rarely have to look too closely at what is drifting by. But when the silence comes, that lid is lifted, and the thoughts we have been postponing, the feelings we have been scrolling past, and the observations we haven't had time to make, all rush into the foreground. This can be overwhelming, and it is a very common experience to feel a sudden wave of fatigue or sadness or restlessness the moment the distractions fade. It's not necessarily that something is wrong, but simply that the backlog of our own humanity is finally getting a chance to be heard. This is where silence acts as a mirror, reflecting back to us the state of our internal world. And in 2025, that reflection can be intense. We process so much news, so much tragedy, so much beauty, and so much change on a daily basis, that our emotional systems are often running at capacity, even if we feel numb or detached. Silence reveals this processing load. It reveals how tired we might actually be, or how overstimulated our nervous systems have become. It is much easier to keep moving than to stop and feel the weight of the momentum. And so the silence feels loud because it is the sound of our own reality catching up with us. It is the sound of the things we haven't said, the decisions we are hesitating to make, and the dreams we have pushed aside for the sake of efficiency. It is completely understandable why we might instinctively reach for noise to drown this out, to return to the smooth, predictable flow of the external world where the stakes feel lower and the engagement feels easier. However, and this is a perspective worth sitting with, the loudness of silence is not necessarily a warning sign to run away from, but perhaps an invitation to stay. It creates a space where the performance of our lives can stop, where we don't need to be a responsive employee, a curated profile, or an informed citizen, but can simply be a breathing, existing human being. The discomfort of silence is often just the friction of this transition, the breaking of the habit of constant doing. Many people find that if they can endure that initial wave of loudness, that first few minutes where the silence feels heavy and demanding, the atmosphere begins to shift. The phantom buzzing fades, the urge to check the screen softens, and the racing thoughts begin to slow down, not because they are resolved, but because they are no longer fighting to be heard over the noise. It is in this deeper silence that we often rediscover a sense of scale, remembering that the urgency of the digital world is often an illusion, and that the present moment, with all its quiet simplicity, is actually the only place where we truly exist. The loudness of silence in 2025 is a testament to how rare this state has become. It feels significant because it is significant. It feels heavy because it is solid, unlike the ephemeral nature of the digital stream. When we sit with it, we are engaging in a subtle act of rebellion against the demand for constant speed. We are reclaiming a small territory of time where nothing is being sold, nothing is being tracked, and nothing is being optimized. It is just time, passing at its own natural rhythm. Of course, this doesn't mean we need to throw away our devices or move to a cabin in the woods to find peace. Nor does it mean that enjoying entertainment or connection is wrong. It is simply an observation that the balance has tipped, and that the contrast between our online lives and our offline reality has become sharp enough to feel physical. The silence is loud because it is trying to balance the scales. It is offering a counterweight to the fragmentation of our attention. Some experience this while driving a car without the radio on, noticing how the landscape suddenly looks different when it isn't accompanied by a soundtrack. Others find it in the early hours of the morning, before the rest of the world has logged on, where the quiet feels protective and clear. And some find it in those unintentional moments, like when the power goes out or when the internet goes down, and after the initial frustration passes, there is a sudden, strange sense of relief, a permission to stop that we struggle to give ourselves. This relief is a clue. It suggests that while we love the connection and the convenience of 2025, there is a part of us that is weary, a part of us that misses the days when boredom was possible, and when waiting was just waiting, not an opportunity to consume. The loudness of silence is the voice of that weary part, asking for a moment of stillness. It is interesting to note that we often try to fix silence, treating it as a problem to be solved with white noise machines, or ambient playlists or background television, as if total quiet is unnatural. But perhaps the discomfort we feel isn't because silence is empty, but because it is too full of the things we have forgotten how to sit with. It is full of presence. It is full of the immediate, tangible world, the light on the wall, the sound of the wind, the rhythm of our own breath. These things are always there, but they are subtle, and they require a quiet canvas to be seen. In a loud world, the subtle things disappear, and so when the noise stops, their sudden reappearance can be startling. We are relearning how to be alone with ourselves, how to be alone with our thoughts without immediately externalizing them or seeking validation for them. This is a skill, and like any skill, it can atrophy when it isn't used. In 2025, we are collectively flexing this muscle again, and it feels sore, feels stiff, feels loud. But that sensation is also the feeling of capacity returning, of space opening up. It is the feeling of the mind expanding back into its natural shape after being compressed into the narrow channels of a feed. So, if you find that silence feels particularly loud right now, if you find yourself restless when the room goes quiet, or if you feel a heaviness in the air when the notifications stop, know that you are not the only one feeling this. It is a shared condition of our time. It is not a sign that you are doing something wrong, or that you are unable to relax. It is simply a sign that you are alive in a world that is moving very fast, and that the stillness is offering you a different kind of experience. It is offering you the chance to listen to the loudness, to let it wash over you, and to see what remains when the echo finally fades. The silence is not your enemy. It is not a void. It is a container. And perhaps the reason it feels so loud is because it is holding everything that truly matters, waiting for you to notice. Thank you for taking this time to reflect on the quiet with me. If this reflection resonated with you, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for being here.